So you've seen the mixed reception most likely online regarding Star Wars Jedi Order. A lot of it has to do with the frame rate, but beyond the frame rate, there are some other things rather, that just don't sit right. The game is a mixed bag, and because of that, this review is going to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to be as spoiler-free as possible. I'm going to probably put some gameplay that's earlier in the game up on screen in the background. I'll try to be as spoiler-free with that as I can, but keep in mind, you're probably going to see some tidbits. But again, it's very early in the game that I'm going to be showing you guys, or we're going to put some trailers mixed in there as well, just to try to do my best to avoid spoilers. Worst comes to worst, just don't look at the gameplay. I try to do as general gameplay as I possibly can when I do these things for that very reason. Okay, so I compiled a list of pros and cons this time around. Usually I do this completely off the top of my head, but I've compiled the list because there are such a mixed bag. So the game, let's start with some of the pros. The game is visually beautiful. It looks good. I think it looks great. I played it on the PS5. Visually, graphically, very nice, very beautiful, very impressive. Unfortunately, even on the PS5, there's some frame rate issues. So you are getting some frame rate drops. And what's really weird is when the cutscenes would start, even during some of the cutscenes themselves felt like they were very, like they dropped frame rate pretty significantly. Like some of the cutscenes felt like they were playing in like 10 FPS or something. It was really weird. I don't know if that was just a stylistic choice, which I know sounds weird on the front, but what I mean is like movie-like cinematics, right? In a movie, the frame rate is 24. And so maybe it just felt like it dropped way more than it did, because the difference from switching to gameplay to maybe like some 24 FPS cinematics was just jarring. I don't know, typically how other games do it. It doesn't feel like that in other games. That's all I can say. And it wasn't necessarily the whole cutscene felt that way, but it was a little janky. The cutscenes felt a little janky to me. The cutscenes themselves looked good, and they were epic, and again, graphically just impressive overall. But it's weird. It's also worth noting that I was playing on performance mode in my playthrough, not quality. Sometimes I'll choose quality and I'll be like, whatever, I don't mind playing on a lower FPS just to get nicer visuals. This time I was like, you know what? I'm hearing some bad things about the FPS. Let's go on performance mode, and I still had some issues there. Maybe not as bad as what people are having on PC. It's probably going to get patched at some point to some extent, but it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, should they have released the game yet? Maybe not. And when we start going through this list, you'll see, why that may be. So in terms of gameplay, the combat's overall fun, right? I mean, if you played the original game, it has some pretty solid combat, and it's made by Respawn. They made Titanfall. Titanfall has some pretty fluid and great combat mechanics overall, and they added some new interesting mechanics. There's like grappling hooks and things like that. So there's some new stuff going on there, and as you progress through the story, you'll unlock various different kind of abilities or things you can do that's going to make you think a little bit harder on how to solve puzzles. The puzzles are pretty good overall for the most part, but sometimes it was very unclear and uncertain what on earth you had to do. Not the kind of way you would typically expect for like puzzles in a game, but even more just like navigation, like where do I got to go? Which brings me to another con, which is the fact that, first of all, the map is not intuitive. The map is bad. It's very hard to use. It's just not, you open up the map, and even just trying to like, navigate the map and move around it, it feels like wonky and weird, and it's just not good. It's bad, very bad. Navigation. The interesting thing about navigation is you can actually turn on a navigation assist in the settings, which would give you obviously a way to know a little bit better, ideally, to know which way to go to get to your next location, right? It helps you kind of traverse the path. The thing is, in the overworld, there's no indicator, there's no map on the HUD, so you got to push the touchpad or whatever the button would be on your corresponding platform if you're on PC or whatever else, to open up the map, and then you got to see, okay, this is where the location is. But again, there's no clear indication how to get there. And even with navigation assist on, it doesn't do anything to help you. In fact, it actually made it worse, because sometimes I'd follow it just adds an extra ping on the map where it's like, it adds a closer ping, right? So it's like, this is the general direction you have to go in. But sometimes you'd go in that general direction, and again, the map is so bad, it'd be so unclear that you get super lost. It's not intuitive. The map and the navigation system is tedious, horrendous. I hated it. I don't ever want to deal with something like that in a game ever again, if at all possible, because it was not a good experience whatsoever. Moving on from that, there is some customization options. So you're gonna, I mean, there are some right out of the gate that you can access, but there's some that you unlock by finding them throughout the world and things like that. Things like, changing Cal's haircut and his beard and his, different things like that. His clothing, his lightsaber, like the color of the actual, lightsaber itself, and then the actual handle and just different mechanics there. So there's some customization options. You can change, BD, and all that, his little, robot, his little bot companion, customize him as well. Just cool customization options there. It almost felt pointless. Honestly, it just felt like we're going to add customization because people like it, but it just felt like, it felt meaningless, honestly. So there was that. There was a bunch of different customization options there. But that's kind of leads me to another point where, how I said, you can find them throughout the world. I almost felt like they were trying to make the world more open. They're trying to add like an open world element, which did it a disservice. It worked more against it than for it. And like I said, that obviously ties into the navigation system. It just wasn't good in that sense. I didn't really care to really explore all that much. I think the game would have been better off, served as just being a more linear experience than trying to make this more open world. I get the idea is cool. Oh, it's a Star Wars, world, Star Wars universe. People want to explore it. Yeah, generally speaking, that would have been a cool idea. I just don't think it hit the mark. I think it fell woefully short of that mark, unfortunately. Moving on from that, there's a skill tree. It's a typical skill tree. It's a little, I guess it's decent. It's not overly crazy or anything like that or unique. It's a skill tree. So, I mean, you have different options to increase how much life you have and how much, stamina, vials, whatever you have, to, unlock new different kind of abilities and everything like that. With, your fighting and, the force and the lightsaber kind of mechanics. There's categories for each of those two things. So, there's a little playing room with that. There's different stances with your lightsaber that you unlock as you progress through the game. That you'll see what I mean. And there's pros and cons to using different stances. Some of them are faster, but they're not as powerful. Some of them are slower, but they're more powerful. And there's trade-offs there. So I guess there's a little bit of, kind of strategizing in that sense. But again, it felt a little bit shallow for me personally, but maybe you'll like it better. I don't know. Story overall is solid. It's nothing incredible. It's nothing like incredibly special. It's not overly unique, but it's solid. I will say that it's hard because for the first half of the game, it felt like it was a lot slower. Second half of the game, it starts to pick up a little bit more, but it's still somewhat slow. And then it's like mostly like the last like 2 or 3 hours of the game where it really like drives it home and it feels like really like, okay, here's the payoff. So there is a payoff, but it just feels like everything leading up to it was a little bit of a chore to get through at some points, right? Overall, pretty good though. Like I said, with the story and the places you explore, intriguing, interesting, nice sandboxes overall. Like I said, some interesting puzzles, but not always clear on what to do. Like I said, with Cal's arc, they really kind of, it was pretty good. They had him work through a lot of things. Okay, some pretty crazy heavy stuff internally. There's some stuff there. Okay, so I don't want to go too much into that because I'll spoil it, but his arc was pretty interesting. It wasn't, like I said, overly unique. Same thing with with the characters. There's some returning characters. There were some new characters. They were all interesting. They weren't necessarily overly unique to me personally, but some of them were intriguing. They at least had me intrigued in the characters, and I thought they were solid. That's going to be a word I'm going to be using a lot for this. Which, speaking of solid audio music overall, Star Wars music, a lot of the themes that you're used to hearing in Star Wars games, not much to say about that. Same thing with the audio, lightsaber sound effects and the blasters. If you know, right? If you know what those sounds are, you know what they are. Overall, pretty good. But we got a few more things to talk about really quick. So I found that the enemies were extremely inconsistent. So for example, sometimes the same kind of enemy, right? It could be even in the same like level per se, same area. sometimes that same enemy was harder, and sometimes that same enemy was easier. And that's like going off the same kind of play style. You got to keep in mind, right? I was playing the exact same way, taking on the enemies typically, in a very similar fashion, and the enemies just felt very inconsistent. All of a sudden, one enemy that normally felt easy felt like really hard, or vice versa. One enemy that was really hard all of a sudden felt really easy out of nowhere. It just felt really inconsistent overall, which also has to go with the boss fights. I can't say too much because of spoilers, and there is story explanations behind one of the ones I'm thinking of. If you know, you know. Okay, if you know, you know. It's late game, like the last 2 hours of the game. There's 2 specific boss fights. One of them comes first, and you would think that would be the harder one, but again, I understand there's some story explanations there. And the last one, it felt like it was like a lot harder for what it was, for who it was, than it necessarily should have been. I don't know, at least compared to other boss fights. Again, it just felt very inconsistent, where like some boss fights felt really tough, and other boss fights felt like they were just like a breeze and a walk in the park. The enemies overall felt inconsistent to me, and that was a little bit annoying. I also say that checkpoints, I know I'm saying a lot of negative stuff because, like I said, mixed bag, man, really mixed bag. But the checkpoints were really irritating. Like, typically to get a checkpoint, you have to go to a meditation spot, and as you're progressing through the levels, there are ways to unlock shortcuts that if you die, it's a little bit easier to get back to where you were from that previous meditation point. But a couple things to take into consideration is, number one, sometimes you can go a little bit without finding a shortcut, and number two is that you have to really look sometimes for the shortcuts. Sometimes they're right in your face. Sometimes you have to really kind of deviate off the path and go looking for them a little bit. And so there were a lot of times where I would die and I would get reset to a checkpoint. I'm like, dude, do I really got to do like all of these rooms and all, like I got to traverse from this point to that point all over again? And it just felt like really weird the way they went about it. Same thing with the boss fights. Some of the boss fights have multiple waves, and you get to the third wave or something, and then it would just spawn you back to the meditation point if you died. Whereas, some games are a little bit more forgiving, where, if there's multiple waves, they'll at least allow you to restart at, let's say wave 3 or whatever. So, I mean, that is kind of preference. Some people might prefer getting completely reset from the start, more risk versus reward. Other people might find that a little bit more annoying because it's, less forgiving. Just thought it'd be worth mentioning that in case, again, depends where you sit on the spectrum. Overall, the game, like I said, the game attempts to be an overworld, but it feels like it's lacking in doing so. It doesn't feel like it flows right in terms of the open world. Even the story felt a little bit kind of blotchy, I guess maybe is the word I'm looking for. I don't know. Overall, very mixed, man. A very mixed bag. I will say this is what I do know. The game is absolutely not, in my opinion, this is subjective, it is absolutely not worth paying full price, especially if you're in Canada, where for some reason prices are just through the roof right now. It is not worth the price they are asking. Wait for a sale. You can do whatever you want. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I've loved Star Wars since my dad ever introduced me to Star Wars way back in the day when I was just a super young kid. My mom and dad took me to Star Wars Episode 1 when it was in theaters way back in the day, with Darth Maul and whatever. I became a huge fan ever since then. And then, like I said, when I was saying my dad would play, Star Wars Episode 4, 5, and 6, the original trilogy that was more from my parents' childhood. They would play them at home, and so I'd watch them at home. And so I've been a fan of Star Wars for quite some time, right? I've really enjoyed the universe. So I if anything, I would have a bias on that front, but like I said, very mixed bag. I love the whole arc with Cal. I love the Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order kind of, I guess stories that they're trying to tell. But in this one, it just felt like it was a little bit mushy and mixed, and it just feels like it wasn't fleshed out the way it should have been. And so for all those things considered, I considered giving it a little bit lower of a score, but I'm actually going to go for a 7 out of 10. I considered 6.5. I did, but I think there's some redeeming qualities there, and it's solid enough in terms of the gameplay is fun, the story is fun, even if there's some really irritating, tedious kind of aspects to it. It's solid enough and interesting enough, especially for a Star Wars fan, where I think it's at least worth a 7 out of 10. But to me, a 7 out of 10 is wait for a sale kind of game, right? It's the kind of game where it's like, you better just wait for it to be a little bit cheaper, because it's it's fun to play. It's worth considering playing, but not at the full price they're asking. That's my opinion. It's subjective. Like I said, there's some issues with it. It's a mixed bag. There's things I enjoyed. There's things I liked. There's things that really annoyed me about it. And because of that, like I said, it's just like a jumble of mixed emotions when it comes to this game. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree or disagree with me? Do you think it should have been a lower score, a higher score? Maybe you played it for yourself. What would you rate it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this one, stick around for more, and I'll see you guys soon in another one. Until then, game on, and thanks for watching.